a year in the regulations and policy area. And we need you guys as people that are in the field or at a regional level or a headquarters level who can feed back to Bob and I and let us know what's working, what do I need, what do we need to change. And so we like for it to be a collaborative environment. And so that's why we like to go out and do presentations like this where we can explain, hey, where do regulations and policies come from? I like to start out presentations just giving a little snapshot of the federal motor vehicle fleet. And it's important to remember that there is a motor vehicle policies out there, but what is a motor vehicle? It's actually a personal property asset. So we fall under the umbrella of asset management. We just specialize in the fleet area for motor vehicles. Right now, we only have the FY 2015 data available. Hopefully by the end of the month, the FY 2016 data will be available. But I just like to show a little snapshot of the federal fleets. And the end of FY 2015, there were 640,304 vehicles reported by federal agencies into the FAST system, which is the Federal Automotive Statistical Tool. And you can see we really do have a big impact on miles traveled, operating costs. We spend $4.3 billion operating those vehicles in FY 2015. So we as property managers, as fleet managers, we have a responsibility to the taxpayers to make sure that we run those vehicles efficiently and effectively. And we hope that our policies and regulations that are in place help you do that as well as meet your mission, because that's what we're here to help you meet your mission. Get your mission done the best you can. Let us handle the fleet part. There are 21 large fleets in the federal government, and that just means they're larger than 2,000 vehicles. A lot of people are really shocked to see that the federal fleet vehicle types, it's mainly a truck fleet, and 62% of the federal fleet are trucks, and only 36% are sedans. But most people see the sedans on the road on an everyday basis, and so they see it on TV. I love watching TV shows and looking for that G plate or that N plate. There's a TV show right now that has an FBI agent who's driving an interior vehicle because it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on it. But, I'm a fleet geek, and so I'm the one who notices that. But we are primarily a truck fleet, light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty trucks. 33% of the fleet is the Postal Service, 39% is civilian agencies, and 28% of the fleet is military. Again, people are a little surprised to find out that 70% of the federal fleets are agency owned. That means you own the asset and you're managing it in your agency. 30% of the federal fleet is leased from GSA fleet, and less than 1% is commercially leased. So where do we go for help? I want to start out showing the difference between, there are two offices at the General Services Administration that get involved in asset management for motor vehicles and personal property. There's the Office of Government-Wide Policy, and there's two divisions, the Vehicle Policy Division and the Personal Property Policy Division. They write policy. It's also under that same umbrella are the people who write the travel regulations. If you've ever wondered where per diem came from, the per diem rates, it comes from the Office of Government-Wide Policy. But then there's another part of GSA that's more operational, and that's with the Federal Acquisition Service, or we like to call it FAS. And inside the Federal Acquisition Service are GSA Fleet Leasing, where you lease vehicles. That's that 30% of the federal fleet is leased through GSA Fleet. And then there's GSA Automotive, which is buying. They're the mandatory source for purchasing vehicles in the federal government for non-tactical vehicles. And then there's the Office of General Supplies and Services, and under that is Personal Property Management. And if you have a need to dispose of a vehicle or dispose of any personal property, you can go to GSA, Federal Acquisition Service, Personal Property Management, to get help with utilization, donations, sales, auctions, all those services. So I just like to show that there's a difference between policy side of GSA and then there's an operational side of GSA. So where does everything come from? What is the framework behind the work that we do on the policy side? There are laws, and laws become regulations. And within a law that is passed by Congress and signed by the President, regulation, it tells you which agency is supposed to issue an implementing regulation. So for personal property management and assets, including motor vehicles, there was a law back in 1949 that said that GSA will issue regulations regarding management of motor vehicles and other personal property assets. And from the regulations, we have advisory bulletins, and those are Federal Management Regulation Advisory Bulletins, which gives us a little bit more information. I'm going to get more into each tab as I go along into the presentation. There's internal agency policy. There's executive orders. There's OMB circulars. OMB is the Office of Management and Budget. There's GAO reports and findings. That's the General Accountability Office. There's Comptroller General decisions from GAO. There's also your Office of General Counsel. A lot of times when there's a policy question, you need to talk to your General Counsel's office and get a decision. There's too many missions in the federal government for it to be regulated, every use of a motor vehicle. And there's too many laws that, with regards to your own specific agency, that only your General Counsel's office would be familiar with to determine if you can use a vehicle in a certain manner or not. A good example of that is there is an agency who uses volunteer drivers of government vehicles. The Veterans Administration, they get people from volunteer drivers to take veterans to doctor's appointments or to different activities throughout the day, but they have special legislative authority to allow volunteer drivers. And so that's when their General Counsel's office would get involved to give permission for something like that. And then there's informed decision making. You know, it's not specifically written in a regulation, a policy, or a law, or a bulletin, but if you can look at the question and determine through informed decision making, oh, what would be the best route for this to happen? Or can we use a vehicle for this? Or can we use a vehicle for that? So regulatory resources. Like to talk about where do we go? Where do we find all this? There's going to be a lot of web links in this presentation because there's a lot of information out on the web. Everything's at your fingertips right now. Even your individual agency regulations, I can usually find them. Like if someone says, oh, well, we don't have a fleet handbook in my agency, and I'll pull up a search engine, type in the agency, and put in words like motor vehicle handbook or fleet handbook, and lo and behold, their fleet handbook will pop up. It's just something that when you get down to the field level, from a headquarters to a field level, you just don't know that you have an internal agency handbook. I know in my own agency, most people that I have talked to through the years didn't know there is an internal agency handbook. So for regulatory resources, you can go to the Federal Register. It's a daily publication website, and you can set parameters in that Federal Register that will automatically email you each time a regulatory notice is issued into the Federal Register. So you can put keywords like motor vehicle or alternative fuel vehicle, or you can put key agencies like Department of Transportation or GSA, and it will automatically email you every day. There's something published with those key words in the Federal Register. Because when regulations and policies are issued, it has to be put into, a lot of it has to be put into the Federal Register as a notice or an interim rule, which gives agencies time to comment. And there's a certain comment period. And so you'll see that an interim rule may be published. There's a 60-day time period for comment. And then once that comment has been received and reconciled, you'll issue a final rule. So it's a really good idea to go to the Federal Register and to set up those so that you can get automatic emails about motor vehicle regulations. So the Code of Federal Regulations, it's commonly known as CFR. It's where all of the federal regulations are kept. So you had a law that was passed by Congress, signed by the President, and then there'll be an implementing regulations for a law, and that is found in the CFR. The ones on personal property management are found in the FMR, which is the Federal Management Regulation. It used to be called the FPMR, which is the Federal Property Management Regulation, but there was a move a few administrations back, it's been a while, where regulations were going to be written into plain language and short question and answer format. And at that time, the personal property regulations, including the ones for motor vehicles, were set to move to the FMR. So a lot of you are, I'll get into this further, but a lot of you are familiar with FMR 102-34, motor vehicle management. That had been moved over, but the regulation regarding GSA fleet leasing, it's still in the process of being moved over from the FPMR to the FMR. So if you ever need to find that, you can always get in touch with me and I'll help you find that in the old FPMR. In the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR, there are certain citations about motor vehicles that are in the FAR. For example, if you have a contract and you're using a government vehicle, an agency-owned asset, or a GSA leased asset, there are certain FAR citations that need to be in the contract for the contractor, your agency, to be able to use those vehicles. And then, as mentioned earlier, there are individual agency regulations. Usually it's in a handbook format, and if you can find that through your own internal agency website or a public website. The rules, statutes, these are the laws. As I mentioned earlier, Federal Property and Administrative Services Act started GSA in 1949. These are just some laws or statutes over the year that are fundamental to the management of motor vehicles. There was the Clean Air Act in 1973 and in 1990, which governs emissions of government vehicles. And it wasn't just government vehicles, it was also the auto industry, but they would like for the federal government to set an example for the rest of the auto industry. And so a lot of the programs from the Clean Air Act have been geared towards the federal fleets. In 1986, it was the Passenger Carrier Act, which gave more information on home-to-work use of government vehicles. In 1989, there was the Ethics Reform Act, which talked about the incidental use of vehicles, which we don't like to talk about a lot because vehicles should be used for official use only, but there are guidelines in place for agencies to issue internal policies and regulations about incidental use. And then in 1992, and then the update 2005 was the Energy Policy Act, which gave the federal fleets alternative fuels and AFE mandates to follow. So this is just a sampling of some of the larger laws that have been passed that impact the federal fleets. Executive orders. So we've had laws, we've had implementing regulations, but then there may be an executive order issued from the Office of the President, which will give a little bit more information on a specific topic, or it will bring together different parts of real and personal property management, for example, to under one umbrella and give a specific task for an agency to manage or to complete. The big one right now is Executive Order 13693, which is planning for federal sustainability in the next decade. And I will go into that a little bit more further in the presentation. But that has specific tasks that the White House wanted agencies to complete in the real property and the personal property world, including fleet management. There's also, under the Executive Office of the President, is the Office of Management and Budget. And so OMB Circular A11, it's an annual budget process that your finance or budget office in your agency goes through each year. And the A11 has a small little component, it used to be just a spreadsheet, about federal fleets, about reporting acquisitions and disposals, and showing OMB where you were going to be in outline years for acquisitions and disposals and meeting targets for the size of your federal fleets. And so that's done every year. We've been able to incorporate that into the FAST reporting process, which is usually, this is due in August of every year. There's also an OMB circular, which has made the news a lot lately, is the A76. It was something that has been used over the years where the government, if they're performing a function, would go into use a circular A76 and kind of bid itself against the private sector to see who could do it more effectively and efficiently. So I noticed that with the new administration come in, A76 has been brought back into play. Hadn't seen it for about 20 years, but that's just something to keep in mind for your fleet services is OMB Circular A76. Regulations. Lots and lots of regulations out there. I'd like to point out that, remember the CFR, I said that earlier, it's the Code of Federal Regulations. So the regulation that covers motor vehicle management on a government-wide basis is 41 CFR 102-34 motor vehicle management. That's the government-wide regulation that applies to all executive branch agencies governing the management of their federal fleets. So you would find that it's in the FMR portion of the CFR. If you have any questions about CFR 102-34, it talks about official use, it talks about seatbelt use, it talks about reporting of data, what types of vehicles you can buy, fueling of vehicles. Every management aspect of a motor vehicle can be found in that regulation. But remember when I talked about when we moved to the FMR, it became concise, question and answer, short information. So there will be what is official use, and then it'll say official use is use determined by your agency. So we don't answer specific questions in the FMR in this regulation, but it's just an overlying view of things. And then your own internal agency regulation can get more specific. We get frequently asked, well, what about the purchase of new vehicles? Why is GSA mandatory source for non-tactical vehicles? Because it's in 41 CFR 101-26.501. It's the purchase of new vehicles. The Chapter 101 tells me that this is a regulation that's still left in the old FPMR, the Federal Property Management Regulation, but it's still in effect, and I do know they are working to move that to 102, which is where the FMR is. I mentioned earlier what regulation governs GSA fleet leasing activities, and that's 41 CFR 101-39. GSA Fleet Leasing has also, within the past year and a half, issued a new customer guide, which can be found on the GSA Fleet drive-through website if you lease from GSA Fleet. a lot of the questions that you have about managing your GSA fleet leases, you can find it in this regulation, but the more updated answers can be found in their customer guide. We get a lot of questions about home-to-work transportation. We refer people back to the regulation, which is 41 CFR 102-5. It's the home-to-work transportation regulation. And then we have a regulation that falls under Bob's purview, which is the exchange sale authority. Did you want to say something about that, Bob?
No, this is Bob. I'm not sure if you mentioned it, Connie, but the GSA regulations can be found at gsa.gov/FMR. That's probably the easiest way to get hold of it, other than through our maybe program websites. Exchange sale is one of the tools that is used for motor vehicle acquisition to acquire replacement property. So as we saw before, agencies own quite a bit of their vehicles. So when you need to replace that vehicle, you can either exchange it or sell it and use the proceeds to obtain your replacement property. Either way, you're decreasing the cost to your agency to obtain that new vehicle. Thanks, Connie.
Thank you. Where am I? Oh, I am going to get more into where to find these regulations besides the main CFR website. The Government Printing Office maintains the most up-to-date ones, and GSA does have it at gsa.gov/FMR, but I'll show those links later in the presentation. Another regulation that people ask about are drivers. OPM does have a regulation about motor vehicle operators and how motor vehicle operators are to be managed in the federal government, and that is 5 CFR 930 subpart A. I do have a link to that later on in my presentation also. So OPM, that's Office of Personnel Management. So a motor vehicle operator is personnel. That's a human resource issue. So GSA manages the vehicle aspect, but the person driving the vehicle, the regulations governing that would be either OPM and internal agency regulations. And so, like I said, a lot of agencies have their own internal agency and bureau level FMR supplements. Some people will take 41 CFR 102-34 motor vehicle management, and they will copy it exactly the same numbering system, every topic, and under that will put their own agency internal policy for each main topic, which it's nice having it in the same numbering system because then you always know where to find it. So we have 41 CFR 102-34 motor vehicle management, and I've said it a couple of times now. That's plain language, question answer format. It's very short, concise answers. But as we've gone through the past 15, 20 years with the plain language format of regulations, we have had to issue advisory bulletins. And those are topical in nature, they are advisory, and they give you more specific information. A big one that we have is FMR, the last one, B38, or indirect costs of motor vehicle fleet operations. NPMA had a fleet webinar last week about indirect costs. But so there is an FMR bulletin which gives you more information about reporting those costs in FAST, which is the Federal Automotive Statistical Tool. It's where you report fleet data. And it's very easy to figure out what's our direct cost for motor vehicle reporting, but each agency wasn't doing it quite the same for indirect costs. And so we issued a little bit more guidance, a few more pages of information on indirect costs. And these bulletins are found at gsa.gov/FMR, and you can look on the left-hand side, there'll be a tab that says bulletins. And there are some these are the motor vehicle ones, but there are some personal property bulletins issued too. that you can also find on that website. So I did a slide on home-to-work transportation. We get a lot of questions on home-to-work transportation, and this is a regulation that was very difficult to write and implement because the law that told us to write the implementing regulation, 31 USC, United States Code 1344, is very limited on what it says. It's very precise. And people are always like, well, why can't we change the home-to-work transportation regulation? Well, we can't because of 31 USC 1344. It's really hard for people to understand that the approval authority to drive a government vehicle home cannot be delegated past the top official in your agency. So if you are the Secretary of, if you're in the Department of Energy, the Secretary of Energy has to approve every vehicle that's being used for home-to-work use. So it's approved by the head of the agency for field work, clear and present danger, compelling operation consideration, and emergencies. And so I just wanted to give a little special note so you would know, well, you can read the regulation on home-to-work transportation, which is FMR 102-5, but if you put 31 USC 1344 in a search engine to bring up the code, the United States Code of where we came up with the guidelines for home-to-work transportation, go look up the code. And when you have people in the field that are giving you a hard time because you won't let them drive their vehicle home, and say, well, why can't I? You can bring up the regulation, but then you can also bring up the U.S. Code, which is very specific on home-to-work transportation. And why is home-to-work transportation so specific and so limiting? It's because it's in the public eye. You know, it's what people see. People have this misconception that, oh, everybody in the government has a vehicle and they get to drive it home at night, and that's costing taxpayers, you know, tons of money. Yes, it could be, but it's a very difficult process to get approved for home-to-work transportation. And some agencies do it by individual people. Some people do it by job classification. So everyone that's in a certain job classification series will be approved for home-to-work transportation. It's getting real interesting lately. I won't dig too deep into this because we have a lot more information to cover. But virtual workers, people who work from home, that's their official duty station, it's gotten, you know, when 31 USC 1344 was written, I don't think that was even thought of, that so much of the federal workforce would be assigned to work straight from home. So that's something to talk about within your agency. And where's one of our frameworks for getting information on federal fleets and how to manage them is your own general counsel's office. And so that would be a topic to talk to with your general counsel's office.
Connie, we do have a question related to that.
Sure.
What is the rule if you work for a tribe?
Okay, so if you're at work for a tribe, you're not an executive branch agency. So you would need to go to your tribe's general counsel to see how these rules and regulations apply to you. You have certain laws and statutes that only apply to the management of the tribe and its assets. And so that would be something that would be determined within your own agency. So I hope that helps. Unfortunately, our regulations that I'm speaking here are for executive branch agencies. And there are some other little caveats of quasi-governmental entities which may fall under that, but it would be your internal general counsel's office that would make the ultimate decision on that. Okay. So I want to just we're talking about fleet rules and regulations, but I just wanted to do a brief word on fuel and maintenance. I like to touch on areas that we get lots of questions on, and one of them is Smart Pay, the fuel cards. Where do I go for information on the fleet fuel cards? So GSA has a Smart Pay program. They have issued credit cards, as you know, and they can use for purchase, for travel, or for fleet. And it's your agency who contracts or goes through a contract vehicle with GSA Smart Pay office to determine who's going to be your provider for purchase, travel, and fleet. And so if you go to GSA Smart Pay's website, you can look up your agency's contact. So say you have, you have agency-owned vehicles. You don't lease from GSA Fleet, but you have agency-owned assets, and you want a fuel card for it. The Smart Pay website will tell you who to go talk to at your agency. They also issue policies. There has been some question in the past about, easy passes and hot lanes and express lanes and what is it called in Florida, the Sun Pass. Can you use a government credit card to pay for these tolls or fees that are being assessed on government vehicles that are using public roadways? Which card do we use? Do we use the purchase card? Do we have the driver use the travel card? Do we use the fleet card? And Smart Pay tried to come up with a policy for that, but there was too many different instances in federal agencies where it wouldn't work for them, so they decided to remain neutral on that. It's up to your agency to decide which credit card to use to pay for these fees. So that's just an example. There is a DoD fleet card program at DLA. If you're a Department of Defense agency, I've put that contact down. And if you're in the business of procuring fuel, Defense Logistics Agency has a bulk petroleum program for energy management, and I wanted to make sure you knew where to go to find that. And I think Jessica is going to email this out to everyone afterwards, so don't start frantically trying to write down some of these websites. So here's some miscellaneous non-energy related. Remember I talked about executive orders, which are, they're specific topic in nature, and Executive Order 13513 was issued in 2009. It's federal leadership on reduction of text messaging while driving. The administration has decided not to ban texting while driving, government-wide or national, and that it's letting each agency issue their own internal guidance. So basically what that executive order says is you need to look at your agency's mission. You need to determine what do you consider a handheld device? As a GPS a handheld device? Is it just a cell phone? What about iPads? And there's so many new electronic devices, and now there's inboarded, part of the vehicle controls that are voice activated. And because technology is changing so quickly, the executive order left it up to the agencies. And you know what your mission is, you know what your drivers need to get done, and you need to put it in writing how for them to do it safely. So the agencies were instructed to issue internal guidance on texting while driving. And I'll show this later in another slide. You still are bound by regulation to follow state and local laws about the use of handheld devices or texting while driving. But there's a copy, there's a link to that executive order. There's also, remember we talked about the FAR, like why would motor vehicle policies be in the Federal Acquisition Regulation? There is the FAR citation, which if you're going to have contractors driving government vehicles, there's a FAR citation you can put into the contract, which is encouraging contractor policies to ban text messaging while driving. So that's another little FAR citation that you can put into your contract when you're going to have a contractor driving a government vehicle. This is
yeah,
go ahead.
What regulations govern the personal liability if you're driving a government-owned vehicle?
I'll get into that a little bit further. It's not really a regulation. It's the Federal Tort Claims Act, which governs you personally while driving a motor vehicle. It's like you must be using a vehicle for official use to accomplish your agency's mission as directed by your agency. And because the Federal Tort Claims Act is implemented a little differently within each agency, GSA tried to issue an advisory bulletin on this, I'm going to say late 70s, early 80s, but within a month of issuing it, rescinded it because each agency handles federal torts a little differently. When your personal liability in driving a government vehicle, your agency needs to explain that to you based on the Federal Tort Claims Act and how your agency implements it. But, I mean, the rule of thumb is performing your agency's mission within the scope of duty and as authorized by your agency. And so there's a lot of wiggle room in that. And so we leave it up. We would advise you to talk to your general counsel's office and your agency fleet manager and your supervisor and your human resources to determine personal liability. Unfortunately, torts are also, which makes it even more complicated. Torts are, if something were to happen and it went to, ended up in a court of law, you know, you're a government driver, you got in an accident on the way to McDonald's while you were on official travel and you hit a third party, and it was in the state of Wisconsin, for example. Tort claims that come into the courts are based on state case law. So something that's allowable in Wisconsin may not be allowable in Texas. And that's why the Justice Department handles all torts claims in the federal government. So it's a really complicated issue. There are workshops that GSA, Fleet, and we've also had Homeland Security do personal liability workshops. And I can get that information to you about personal liability because it gets really complicated. And so you can always email vehicle.policy@gsa.gov, and I can point you to some previously recorded webinars or workshops. I think it's on a YouTube channel about personal liability and driving a government vehicle. Okay, I'm going to get back to the slides. A lot of people don't realize there is a records management retention schedule for motor vehicle and aircraft maintenance and operation records. It's the National Archives and Records Administration General Records Schedule 10, and it's available on the website for the archives, and it lists specifically how long do I need to keep fuel receipts, how long do I need to keep accident forms. And this is just a General Records Schedule 10, meaning it's the minimum requirement for retaining records related to the management of a motor vehicle. But you can always, in your agency, have more stringent policy. So you can pull up General Records Schedule 10, but you should also look at your own agency. And in our agency, it's the Executive Secretariat Office that maintains the good old-fashioned file plans. And see what it is and what the general record schedule is versus what your agency requires. Wow, time is flying by, isn't it? Hot topic 1, I was just going to talk about Executive Order 13693. It was signed in March 19, 2015. It established sustainability goals, continuing the VAM process, and mandates asset level data reporting. And right now it is in effect, and agencies have been working through their headquarters level, through DOE, through GSA, and through the White House Council for Environmental Quality to implement the requirements of Executive Order 13693, which called for a 40% federal reduction in greenhouse gas reduction. But that was not just for fleets, it was also for building management. How does Executive Order 13693 and VAM fit together? I kind of put that on this slide. I'm not going to go through it specifically. Remember, we talked about executive orders are topical in nature, and then we also have the FMR, Federal Management Regulation, which is short, concise, question, answer. And so we are going to be issuing a couple of GSA bulletins because of Executive Order 13693. A bulletin gives you more information, and we're going to have one on telematics and VAM very shortly. Asset level data reporting is still required with Executive Order 13693. How does it all tie together into the regulation? Well, the regulation already states you have to report data on your federal fleets, and so the executive order was just making it more out there that, yes, you need to be doing this. It's already in the regulation, so now you need to do it and make sure you get it done by a certain date. Presidential transition is our hot topic number 2. I just kind of threw this in there just because it's all happening in the next week. So what does a new president mean? It means there's many political appointees entering all levels of federal government. And what's your role as a fleet manager? You're going to be asked to provide vehicles and services to support the orderly transfer of power. You need to educate the new employees, the new appointees on how they can and cannot use the vehicles. And then my coworker threw in there, keep new appointees out of jail. And so we just recommend that you come up with a fleet information packet or reference guide for new appointees that talks about official use, personal liability, incidental use or not incidental use. We get a lot of questions, can a spouse or family travel in a GOV? We just talked a little bit about self-insurance in the Federal Tort Claims Act, driver responsibilities. So with all these new people coming on board, this is just a little snapshot of maybe you could have your admin services office send something out. We just want to remind people this is how we use vehicles, this is how you're not supposed to use vehicles, and no, you can't drive that vehicle home type thing. I talked earlier about Executive Order 13513 about text messaging while driving. Well, the FMR, the Federal Management Regulation 102-34, which is motor vehicle management, it does have a part that says, do we have to follow state and local laws while driving a government vehicle? And the answer is yes. And that includes texting and the use of handheld devices. There's 2 links here. These links will give you the most up-to-date information on state and local laws about texting and handheld device bans. Sometimes it's a first offense, sometimes it's secondary. You have to be doing something else before the cop can pull you over. And so where do you go to find that? And get this information out to your drivers. Let them know, hey, if you're going to be driving in D.C., you can't do anything on a mobile device in D.C. And this is where you send them like, well, you do, because the FMR says you have to follow state and local laws. And the local law in D.C. is zero tolerance, zero use of mobile devices while driving. I talked about this earlier. OPM regulates drivers, not GSA. There's a link to the OPM regulation, and it is for motor vehicle operators if someone's in that job classification, but there's a little caveat in it when you dig into the regulation that talks about incidental drivers of government vehicles. And that's what I would consider myself, an incidental driver. I think 4 times a year I drive a government vehicle when I'm on official travel. And so it's up to your agency to determine what that definition of incidental driver is. And so that's why I bring this up here, is if you want to see there's definitions, there's medical evaluations that are required, what authorizations need to be in place for a government employee to drive a government vehicle. There's corrective actions in place. And like I said, there's that one little sentence about incidental drivers. And so I always like to point people to this. So where do I go for policies in my agency? You go to your agency fleet or personal property manager. You go to your agency general counsel's office, and you look for your agency internal directives and guidance documents. You may have never seen them, but they're out there. I've seen them for most federal agencies just by doing a simple web search. So talk to your agency fleet manager. Have your agency fleet manager, if you don't want to talk directly to your general counsel's office, have your agency fleet manager do it. And then ask them for a copy of internal agency directives and guidance. So these are just some resources I've already gone over and the websites to find them. The websites for government-wide policy for vehicles, I've talked about Federal Management Regulation 102-34, has all the current advisory bulletins, has a library of documents, it's got the contact information for agency fleet managers. Some people just retired those, so if your agency fleet manager has retired, let us know. We'd love to update the website. GSA Fleet and Automotive I've talked about. Federal Automotive Statistical Tool. Where do I go to get the login procedures? And that's the website for that. Not only does GSA regulate federal fleets, but Department of Energy does also, especially with sustainability, greenhouse gas reductions, and alternative fuel vehicles. And they have a wealth of information. It's under the Federal Energy Management Program. We call it FEMP, DOE FEMP. They have a Federal Fleet Management Handbook. They have an Alternative Fuels and Advanced Vehicles Data Center. If you're driving an alternative fuel vehicle in the middle of Utah and you want to know where to get ethanol fuel, you can go to that website and they'll tell you where to go. So Department of Energy has a wealth of information. The Office of Management and Budget, we talked about them in the A11. Energy, this is just some more websites you can go to. If you're looking for specific things like, let's see, I'm trying to think. Like just specific mission-related things like that's incidental use of vehicles actually. Searching Comptroller General decisions can always be a fun task. Like, can I, take my wife on a government trip with me or something, or my child? If you search the general decisions, it has case history where GAO, Comptroller General, has made decisions on things that affect the use of public funds. And so that's a really good thing to just spend some time in. There is an international standard for fleet management. It's ASTM International Standard for Fleet Management, which Bob Holcomb worked on. I've got the link to that. And then always consult your federal fleet managers. I've got a list of all the agency fleet managers. That's the link to that website. There's the vehicle policy website, the personal property policy website. More information. There are definitely forums and interagency groups you can get involved with. There's MVEC, FedFleet, Interfuels. The DC Auto Show has training. Energy Exchange, which is managed by DOE FEMP. NPMA has the National Education Seminar and regional events. There's PMAC and ICPM. And then that's us. If you have further questions, you can always email them to vehicle.policy@gsa.gov.